Locations. Flotsam Forest. The wilderness surrounding Flotsam was a thick, impassable wood where inexperienced travelers could easily lose their way and fall victim to wild beasts or, even more probably, elven arrows. A rarely used, thickly overgrown route led to Aden, but given the forest's dangers, most travelers preferred to journey by river. Brothel. Flotsam's brothel was one of only two noteworthy attractions available to visitors and locals. Yet unlike the scaffold, the bordello kept regular hours, offered a regular repertoire, and had a regular staff. Flotsam. Flotsam, a river port and trading post, lies along the upper course of the Pontar among inaccessible forests in the valley that bears the river's name. Numerous trade routes meet here, and the Temerian and Dandelion border is located nearby. Land travel in the region was arduous and dangerous, for Scoia'tael units prowled the woods. However, as they say, elves like cats are shy of water, so most travelers and merchants chose to sail the river. Flat-bottomed barges, punts, scows, and even sea-going cogs visited the harbour, ferrying goods between Aden, Kedwen, Temeria, Redania, and Sidaris on their seashore. No wonder then that this ostensibly small outpost was of vital economic importance. He who controlled it drew immense profits from trade. At the start of our story, Flotsam belonged to Temeria, and its small garrison was tasked with enforcing the law and providing protection from river pirates, Scoia'tael units, and monsters inhabiting the surrounding forests. Newboy. Grateful for the warning provided earlier, Newboy not only believed that Geralt was innocent, but helped the Witcher avoid the guards, and thus honesty had proved to be the best policy, which is true sometimes at least. Einar Gausel. In addition to being a well-informed bookseller, Einar Gausel was also an accomplished barber. In discovering this, Geralt learned of the only person in Flotsam who would be able to do anything about his hair. If Lovinen's non-humans had been organized as a community, the dwarf Einar Gausel would have been the closest thing to its leader. Though the Scoia'tael considered him a collaborator on a human leash, Einar tried to represent the non-human minority as best he could, even if that meant mediating between its members and the commandant. Furthermore, he ran something akin to a bookshop. Given its location in what was a complete backwater, his selection of titles was quite impressive. Merse. Merse was a typical example of widespread bureaucratic nepotism. It was rumored that he had outright fled Vizima after bringing some unsavory troubles down upon its head. His head, not its. His cousin Loredo then granted him a comfortable posting in Flotsam, and Merse saw this as a second chance. Gaspar. In Flotsam, Geralt bumped into a pair of strange scholars. Alchemist Gaspar tried to convince the Witcher to take part in a mysterious experiment on Witcher physiology. The study would only yield results many years from down the road. Farid. In Flotsam, Geralt bumped into a pair of... well... The alchemist Farid was one of them. He and his court Gaspar tried to convince them. Well, same thing really. Triss Meriold. For those reasons, after Foltest's death, the Sorcerers decided that she would help the Witcher most by staying at his side. Not heeding her threatened position as court, she harnessed all her strength and powers to help Geralt, whom she still had feelings for. I was not there at the time, but I heard tales of the show of power Triss put on at the beach near Flotsam. Though she was weakened and barely conscious, the Sorcerers managed to sustain a magical barrier, and the three survived the Scoia'tael arrows thanks to her. Nobody was surprised that Triss knew Síle de Tansarville. A more attentive observer would certainly have noticed the chill in their greetings, as well as Triss's evident dislike for her elder colleague. Discretion, a virtue I have always professed, obliges me to remain silent about the circumstances in which, through the person of Vernon Roche, I began working with the Temerian Intelligence Service. Suffice it to say that there comes a moment in everyone's life when, facing great events, they cannot remain indifferent, and so I could not stand aside as history took shape before my very eyes. My dedication to the cause brought me to Flotsam at the time. There, through an unfortunate incident involving twins at the local brothel, a town guard, a dog, a cat, and an oil lamp, I wound up on the scaffold in the town square, from which I barely escaped with my life. Vernon Roche. Continuing his private investigation, Vernon headed for the Temerian and Dandelion border, where he expected to find clues to the Kingslayer's whereabouts. Thanks to his very best informant, Roche knew that the man could have been hiding among the Scoia'tael located in the vicinity of Flotsam, a trading post. This way, the royal hound Vernon Roche was on the hunt once more. The list of Vernon Roche's achievements and heroic deeds was almost as long as the list of the atrocities and depravities he had allegedly committed along the way. It is a fact that, as the scrawlings on the wall of the University of Oxenford say, pacifying non-humans is like wallowing in mud. Everyone gets dirty, generally with blood. Aryan La Valette. Honor prevented the proud youth from fleeing his family's seat while it was in enemy hands. Aryan made a decision that meant certain death for himself, but he nevertheless made it without hesitation, sealing with his sacrifice the bloodiest chapter even in La Valette's family annals. Demavend. Demavend, son of Vernon, ruled the kingdom of Aden, which was mightily aggrieved during the last war with Nilfgaard. A proponent of authoritarian rule, he was seen as having no love for non-humans. He often moved radically against the Scoia'tael, though he ruled in spite of himself when the guerrillas perpetuated massacres on his own people, as these justified the punitive expeditions he delighted in sending into the foothills of Doblathana. He also showed no shyness about imprisoning and torturing rabble-rousers and street prophets who would interfere in his politics. Thus it is no wonder that many could not wait to see him dead. In spite of this, his subjects could not help but be surprised by his death, for it is not every day that a crowned head paints the palace floor with his blood. Iorveth. They say all elves are beautiful, that they are born thus. In Iorveth's case, someone set out to change this, marking his face with an ugly scar that the elf partially hid beneath a crimson headscarf. Iorveth was a living legend, the elusive leader of a Scoia'tael unit whose members gave no thought to laying down their arms and continued their war against humans. Stories of his deeds, of his deep hatred of the One, painted him as more akin to a vengeful ghost than to an individual made of blood, bone and flesh. Certain sources claimed that Iorveth was the Kingslayer's ally and thus involved in recent events, yet Geralt's first meeting with the elf brought few answers and ended with Scoia'tael archers laying down a deadly barrage. Indeed, it seemed at the time that the elf would only ever answer the Witcher with arrows. In the eyes of some people, like Loredo or Roche, Iorveth was a common criminal, his hands stained by the blood of innocents. Indeed, the list of those he had cut down in his fight for freedom could easily rival the number of ballads, romances, and ditties in my repertoire. Zoltan Chivay. The dwarf Zoltan Chivay is a close friend of Geralt's and mine. Met while we were sneaking through the forest and wilderness of Bruges and Sodden when war raged around the hooves of Nilfgaardian cavalry thundered on the high roads. Like many of his kin, he later fought at Brenna in the Mahakam Volunteer Detachment, a unit that contributed greatly to the victory, although this fact is sadly ignored by most chronicles. After the war he wanted to start a business and even thought about taking a wife, yet fate had things arranged a bit differently. Zoltan had proved his friendship to the Witcher many times, eagerly standing at his side in any moment of need, disproving those who claim that each and every dwarf is a spiteful, aggressive son of a bitch, that they do not care for human plight and that coexistence is impossible. I know many non-humans, and if anything stands in the way of coexistence, it is human ignorance, spite and ungratefulness. They say a dwarf would get himself hanged for a friend, but Zoltan was in my company on the scaffold for other reasons. The local authorities had accused him of colluding with the Scoia'tael, and that is usually enough to earn one the main role in entertainment, like a morning execution. Bernard Loredo. At the time of the story, Bernard Loredo was the commandant of the town watch of the river port and trading post of Flotsam. He was well suited to the position, amply demonstrating this through his brutal and heavy-handed approach to enforcing the law and meting out justice to the town. This boorish veteran of the Temerian army was perfectly happy with his posting to this backwoods, as he had turned with the borderland settlement into a private fiefdom which he ruled through fear and might, passing and executing judgment at whim. I was exceptionally lucky to escape the news back then. Despite my deepest desire to the contrary, it would not be the last time we saw Bernard Loredo. In spite of maintaining a smokescreen of law and order in Flotsam, Loredo was as benevolent to non-humans as Emperor Emir was to proponents of democracy. Given the slightest excuse, Bernard would have gladly rid the trading post and its environs of all who were not human, using any means available. John Natalis. It seemed that every other person you meet took part in the last war against Nilfgaard. Such are the times in which we live. Yet we best remember those who made their mark in the annals of the conflict. Natalis, Constable of Temeria, is one such person. Supreme Commander of the cumulative forces of the North in the Battle of Brenna, Natalis fought valiantly, commanded wisely, and contributed vastly to the victory, despite being outnumbered by the enemy 2-1. And he did not rest on his laurels after the battle. Instead, he pursued the foe, routing him nec Nuncius Claudius or nearly so, leaving but a few stragglers to flee beyond the Yaruga. Natalis was honored richly for his deeds, and the square in Vizima now bears his name. After Foltest's death, Natalis temporarily served as regent of Temeria. Síle de Tansarville. I know from experience that magicians are not above lasting for power. Among sorceresses alone there are many whose ambition leads them to pull strings, moving kings and other mighty forces of this world. To command the elements in spectacular fashion, summoned genies, bend fate, dictate royal proclamations, or at least to force others to eat chicken without cutlery. That is why magicians such as Síle de Tansarville, known as the Corviri Lona, stood apart from the others. Lady Síle was not known to interfere in politics, at least not visibly, instead dedicating her days to research. Strict, calm, and collected, unlike other sorceresses, she did not display her feminine charms, nor did she flirt with men, jiggling her posterior before them at every occasion, though, and I must remain true to myself here, the world would undeniably be a much poorer place without typical sorceresses. The reason for Síle de Tansarville's presence in the backwater town like Flotsam was initially a mystery, yet it quickly became clear that she had come there because of the Kayran, a river monster. For sorceresses gladly use the organs of exotic creatures as ingredients for magical preparations, and Síle was no exception. Síle's presence also turned out to be a lucrative opportunity for Zoltan, however odd that might sound. The dwarf cut gems for her magical apparatus. Gargantuan Monsters, Dragon. Once dragons were commonplace and ruled the continent absolutely. Dragon fire was the bane of cities, and dragon appetite was a constant threat to the first colonizers. Sorcerers stood alone against these creatures. Witches were created to fight them. Today dragons are nearly extinct. Sometimes forktails and slipstarts can be seen, but compared to dragons, they are like stray cats to tigers. The beasts were exterminated by professional hunters such as the famed Grinfrid Reavers. Alchemical components found in a dragon's body are among the most expensive on the market and are in high demand among sorcerers. The beast's roasted tail is a real delicacy. Kayran. The Kayran stands apart from among all creatures, large and small, beautiful and horrible. It is unique, not unlike any other being. Doubtless, it is a post-conjunction creature that appeared in our reality in the time when the worlds intermingled. It took up residence in the Pontar's waters where it lived to this day. The chroniclers mention instances when the Kayran appeared on the river's surface in various places over the ages. There is no certainty whether it is the same creature slowly moving up and down the river, or perhaps his progeny is seen there, here and there. Insectoids, Arachas. Arachnids are lone hunters. They patiently wait for their prey to kill it with one swift strike when it appears. The same is true for Arachas, a huge creature that took a liking to the riverside forest, becoming its undisputed king, a ruler who does not tolerate other hunters on its territory, including witches. Endrega. Endregas are forest creatures that resemble arachnids. They are especially fond of floodplains, as moisture and tall grass suit them. Longer than they are tall, they move about on all fours and are extremely difficult to spot as they lie motionless, awaiting their prey. Like Kikimos, Endregas are divided into castes, with warriors being most numerous, guards being less common, and queens being a real rarity. Necrophages, Rotfiend. What Rotfiends are, everyone can see. Even seeing them is not necessary, as hearing their name shouldn't be enough to tell anyone what creatures might bear this unpleasant title. The creatures multiplied after the last northern war and today plague the wilderness and villages and forest settlements. Drowner. Sometimes a drowned man returns as a monster to haunt the living. Tormented with his death, he murders his victims. He prefers to draw them beneath the water surface, tearing the drowning victim to shreds with sharp claws and eat them like a wet biscuit. Such creature is called a drowner. They are quite often found at the banks of the Pontar, since the huge river with regular shipping and riverside villages provides them with ample sustenance. Others, Nekker. Imagine a drowner that burrows tunnels, climbs trees, is more vicious than usual, and when ambushing its prey, it does so with many of its kin. Now you have a good idea of what a Nekker is. These primitive creatures are the bane of the wilderness. The inhabitants of forest villages fear them, and animals give their nests a wide berth. Nekkers are social creatures, gathering in something akin to tribes, for they can only repel the attacks of stronger assailants en masse. Harpy. Some are repulsed by Rotfiends, others cannot stand to hear of bull wars, but I find harpies, foul-tempered beasts with a penchant for thieving worst of all. Fortunately, the creatures prefer wild mountainous areas dense with rocky ledges upon which they can build their nests. However, they invariably establish themselves near human settlements for the simple reason that they would be hard-pressed to find anything worth stealing amongst animals. Alright. It's a bit difficult to control a mouse if you don't see it. Wraiths. The wraiths are not, as some claim, a projection of an inner fear. They are visible, tangible, and dangerous on top of that. The priests teach that the people who die suddenly, leaving this vale of tears with important tasks left unfinished, become such ghosts. So wraiths have their own names. Sometimes they are unaware of them, but more often they aim to achieve them, not caring for the living. Diagrams. We have a claw, a witch's sword, a heavy leather jacket. Yeah, I'll take a good hard look at that stuff. Harpy trap, we'll need that later. I have tutorials, which I won't read out, but check so that my computer doesn't tell me I haven't read them. Me here. Oh, yeah. Dancing Star. Witches rarely use fire in combat as it conjures up shadows that can be disorienting during a fight. However, when facing hordes of monsters, they often set aside finesse in favor of using weapons of mass destruction. The Dancing Star, a bomb that bursts flames, is one such weapon. This bomb is especially effective against creatures that attack in swarms and are vulnerable to fire. It can also be used to ignite the clouds of gas produced by the Dragon's Breath bomb. Dragon's Dream, not breath, yes. The members of certain Zerrikanian religious sects claim that Dragon's Dream bombs are filled with visions of all-consuming destructive fire, from whence the bomb's name. Upon detonation, the bomb releases a cloud of gas that ignites violently when exposed to an open flame. Clouds from multiple dragon streams can ignite one another in a chain reaction that incinerates creatures spread out over a very large area. Wild Hunt. According to tradition and eyewitness accounts, the Wild Hunt abducts people, forcing them to join its mad gallopade on the sky. Its harvest is especially rich just before or during a great war, like a few years ago in Novigrad, when over 20 people went missing without a trace after the Wild Hunt passed. Some of the abductees managed to escape the cavalcade back into the world of the living, but the stories they told were so extraordinary that they were always considered insane. Culture, sorceresses. Sorcerers, excuse me, wrong gender. Sorcerer is the name customarily applied to a male person capable of commanding the power, though it is but one of the many terms or phrases. Most of them are highly flattering to have been used over the ages. The terms have ranged from the rather respectful title of Wise One to the somewhat less specific Bloody Son of a Bitch, the Plague Taken. As for women, this persuasion, that is, sorceresses, they have been called everything from archmistress to a colloquial expression I will not repeat out of regard for the language and respect for the female gender. The command of the power these mages possess sets them above mere mortals, which can be good or bad. From the dawn of time, history remembers mages either as pure-intentioned and courageous heroes or as rogues bereft of reverence and faith. Human memory tends to remember the latter for longer, which may be why common folk mostly hold people of this profession in contempt. Dwarves. Dwarves are one of the elder races. Stocky and bearded, with strongly built bodies and low voices, they are distinguished for their height, which is lower than human. Of simple and direct manners, they are sometimes seen as grumpy, unkind, and greedy. I have to stress that my own opinion of the dwarfs is by no means similar to the latter part. Interestingly enough, I'll say that later. I only cite it here to impress to present the views of other people, even if they are dull-minded, hate-blinded buffoons. Mahakam is the dwarves' mountainous homeland, famed for its numerous mines where precious stone and ores are mined. Many dwarves also live in human cities, for that race usually adapts to new neighbors easily, something that cannot be unfortunately said about a large part of humanity. Despite vexatious persecution and even bloody pogroms, the existence with dwarves goes a lot better than with elves. Their flair of trade and craft makes them excellent merchants, bankers, smiths and armorers. Side note, the plural of dwarf is correctly spelled with F and S rather than VES. However, in a fantasy setting it is somehow common to use the other one, the VES plural, which is something that Tolkien did deliberately in The Lord of the Rings, and he also said that in the intro to The Hobbit. And here we see both forms, which is highly unusual and I suppose a mistake, because usually, or an error actually, usually you stick with one version. Here we have both. We have dwarves with a V and with an F in the plural. Yes, I noticed such things. Magic. The power the sorcerers can command is commonly called magic. In the opinion of a certain sorceress I am acquainted with, magic is chaos, an art and a science, a curse, a blessing and progress. However poetic it may sound, it is hard to find a better simile. Everything depends on the person that uses that power, of course. Still, it is a fact that it can be used to achieve things not possible to normal humans. The witches' signs are also a form of magic, but sorcerers look at them with disdain, since they cannot be compared to the forces the sorcerers themselves command. Without magic, our world would certainly be less interesting, and many beautiful things would be forgotten. Geography. Pontar Valley. If you have but a morsel of geographical knowledge, one glance at a map is enough to know why the Pontar Valley is strategically important. It is here that the borders of Temeria, Redania, Kedwen and Adon meet. It is the valley that physically marks these frontiers. They say that he who controls the Pontar Valley controls the north. So it is no wonder that the cited realms have clashed here more than once. Blood has often mingled with the waters of the Pontar, though the reasons for this have varied. Wars waged by nobles in pursuit of political interests and merchants seeking trade privileges have been intermingled with riots and massacres, elven uprisings and the revolts of frontier barons. All these have been garnished with the occasional peasant rebellion, an event that forces often quarreling factions to unite and crush plebeian mobs drunk on blood and carnage. As the reader will soon learn, this time the region would again bear witness to events both important and bloody. Politics. Scoia'tael. Scoia'tael is a name used by the rebels fighting for non-human freedom. In the common tongue it means squirrels. As some would have it, it is because of squirrel tails that adorn the rebels' caps, or from the forest board they had to survive on. Scoia'tael formed units over a score strong, consisting mainly of elves that sometimes dwarves and halflings joined too. During the last war against Nilfgaard, the Scoia'tael fought on the side of the Empire, making diversions great damage beyond our lines. Despite the provisions of the Peace of Sintra, many did not disarm and continued to fight, especially when it turned out that Nilfgaard sacrificed them in the name of peace and gave the unit leaders to the Nordlings to be executed.